Jeffrey Dahmer, convicted serial killer and sex offender. Killed 17 men and boys between 1978 and 1991. He was killed in 1994 by a fellow prisoner.
Who was Jeffrey Dahmer? Jeffrey Dahmer was an American serial killer who took the lives of 17 men and boys between 1978 and 1991. Over the course of more than 13 years, Dahmer sought out his victims, mostly black men, at gay bars, malls, and bus stops, lured them home with promises of money or sex, and gave them alcohol laced with drugs before strangling them to death. He would then engage in sex acts with the corpses before dismembering them and disposing of them, often keeping their skulls or genitals as souvenirs. He frequently took photos of his victims at various stages of the murder process, so he could recollect each act afterward and relive the experience.
Dahmer's first murder occurred just after graduating from Revere High School in June 1978, when he picked up an 18-year-old hitchhiker named Stephen Hicks and took him home to his parents' house.
Getting the guy to get drunk, he tried to get up. Dahmer killed him by striking him in the head and strangling him with an iron. Dahmer dismembered Hicks's body, placed the body parts in plastic bags, and buried them behind his parents' house. He later exhumed, crushed the bones with a sledgehammer, and scattered them across a wooded ravine.
And it was in September 1987 that Dahmer took his second victim, Stephen Tomei. They check into a hotel room and drink, and Dahmer eventually wakes up to find Tommy dead, with no memory of the previous night's activities. He later told police that he intended to drug Tommy but not kill him, and he just couldn't believe that happened. Dahmer bought a large bag to transport Tommy's body to his grandmother's basement, where he dismembered him and masturbated to the corpse before disposing of the remains. He kept Tommy's head, which had been wrapped in a blanket, for weeks after the murder.
Dahmer later said that after Tommy was killed, his obsession with killing reached its peak, and he didn't even try to stop it after that. He killed 2 more victims. The first was James Dockstetter. Jeffrey met Dockstetter at a bus stop in front of a gay bar in Wisconsin and lured him to go with him. Dockstetter was a 14-year-old Native American boy who ran away from his violent father, only to die 2 days after escaping from home. Jeffrey was killed by the traditional method of strangulation and beating, and no traces of him were found later. The second victim, Richard Guerrero, was the only Spaniard on Jeffrey's list of victims, and he was 22 years old when he was killed. He kept his body in acid for months before decomposing and disposing of the remains. Before his grandmother forced him out in 1988, she was unaware of his crimes but was tired of his drinking, his tendency to bring young men into her house, and the occasional bad smells.
In September 1989, about a year after moving into his new apartment, Jeffrey called 24-year-old Anthony Sears. He was the first African-American victim on Jeffrey's list. He was also the first victim whose body parts were recovered. After raping and killing him, Jeffrey Dahmer kept his skull and some of his organs.
Raymond was a 32-year-old black man when he met Dahmer. Raymond was a young gay prostitute who was the second to be murdered in Jeffrey's last flat in Oxford Flats. He was killed by the traditional method of drugging, then raping, then strangling and dismembering. His skull was later found.
Jeffrey met Edward at a club and took him to his apartment. Edward was 27 years old. Jeffrey kept his body in the refrigerator for several months but ended up destroying the body, and no parts of it were ever found.
In September 1990, Dahmer met Ernest Marquis in a bookstore. Ernest was 22 years old and a student at a dance school.
Due to his physical strength, Dahmer couldn't kill him by suffocation and instead cut his throat and left him to bleed to death. Dahmer did not dispose of or analyze Ernest's body like the rest of the victims, but rather kept it whole and cut it up, which is the first body that Jeffrey began to practice cannibalism on, as he ate Ernest's heart and other parts of his body.
In the same month of September 90, Jeffrey committed another crime, which was the murder of David Thomas. David Thomas was also 22 years old. Jeffrey seduced and drugged him, but unlike the rest of the victims, he did not rape him, dead or alive, because he did not like him according to him. The body was completely disposed of.
Curtis Schwatter was a 17-year-old child studying nursing. Jeffrey seduced him by going to his apartment to photograph him nude for some money. To end up being drugged, raped, and dismembered, Jeffrey kept his genitals and skull.
Errol Lindsay was 19 when he met Jeffrey Dahmer in April 91. Jeffrey lured him to his apartment and drugged him. Jeffrey made a new experiment with Errol, which is the cracking of his skull while he was alive to fill the brain with hydrochloric acid to create a living zombie, as he described it. The experiment did not work, and he dismembered the corpse and kept some of his parts in his skull.
Anthony was 31 years old and was deaf and mute. Jeffrey lured him to his apartment in May 91, beat and strangled him, and left his body for 3 days before dismembering it.
Conrack's murder was the ugliest of all Jeffrey's crimes, just 4 days after Anthony was killed. Conrack was a 14-year-old immigrant child from Laos when he was killed by Jeffrey. Jeffrey was previously convicted of molesting his older brother and spent a year in prison. Jeffrey drugged Conrack and injected hydrochloric into his head before leaving to get some beer. The surprise was in the child's awakening and leaving Jeffrey's apartment, to fall in front of the building unconscious, to be found by 3 women who tried to save him and called the police so that the police would come. At that time, Dahmer arrived and found the woman with the police and the unconscious child. Dahmer claimed that the child was not a minor, and that he was 18 years old, and that he was his lover who lived with him. Under the amazement of the women, the police allowed Dahmer to take the child and take him back to his apartment to cut him up later.
Fourteenth victim, Matt Turner, 1991. Matt Turner was 20 years old when he met Jeffrey at a gay demonstration in Chicago to persuade Jeffrey to go with him to Wisconsin to strangle and kill him later. The killer placed his internal parts inside a barrel of acid for analysis. Victim 15, Jeremy Weinberger, 1991. On July 91, Jeffrey met Jeremy, a 23-year-old Puerto Rican. After being drugged and injected with boiling water into his skull, Dahmer describes Jeremy's death as extraordinary as his only victim who died with eyes open. He kept his corpse in the bathroom for a week before dismembering it. 16th victim, Oliver James, 1991. In July 91, Jeffrey also met Oliver James, a 24-year-old bodybuilder. He drugged and strangled him with a leather belt. He found his head and heart in Brad Jeffrey when he was later arrested.
The 17th crime, Joseph Bradhoft, 1991. Joseph was from Minnesota at the age of 25, and he was the last victim of Jeffrey on July 19, 91. He was a father of 3 children and was looking for work in Wisconsin, and Jeffrey tempted him with some money in exchange for some pictures. He was killed and left in Jeffrey's bed for 2 days.
Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video. Please subscribe to the channel and activate the alert bell. Bye, guys.